Hey, hello, this is Bob Jackson. This is week 3 for the SC 202 course in the fall of 2022. And this chapter is chapter 18, and it's on Earth's waters. Okay, and I'm going to try to make this most appropriate and cover the content that would be most appropriate for elementary grades and something that you could by far teach in most of the grade levels, and particularly upper elementary for sure. And but it can be good. It can be fun. It can get you doing some things. One thing I wish we could do, which I did for a number of years, and that is water testing. I did for years where I took students as when I was a high school teacher for 15 years. I took students out west to Colorado, and that's all we did was water testing, water quality tests, and we also did trout habitat research where we're seeing what the quality waters were for trout. And then we tested the waters for contaminants in the water and seeing if there's any links to actually global warming and, well, not so much global warming, but emissions from power plants, which is linked to global warming, but sulfur oxides and stuff. Anyway, but we were testing for, and we never did find any really bad effects up there, which was great up there in the mountains. But there are test kits that you can get that are relatively less expensive nowadays. You can even buy them on Amazon and show students some water testing type stuff and make it a little bit fun in the classroom on just seeing what's in water, even if it's like your tap water at home and having a kit that you just test for hardness and show them that there is stuff in water. So I'm not able to do that in this course with this being an online course, but it is something that I recommend that you could do as lab activities, okay, or even demonstration. I mean, you could demonstrate. You could run some water in a glass at school and have a little water testing kit and show them that even though water looks nice and clear and clean, that you can show them that there are some things in water to be concerned about. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of getting ahead of the game and talking it, but that's how you can add some action into this and some hands-on learning. So anyway, let's go into this. We're going to cover water on Earth, of course, the water cycle, and then freshwater resources. And what we're talking about there is where our water comes from. Okay, so as we move into this, okay, if we take a look at all the water on the Earth, 97% of the water is in the oceans of the Earth. Again, I think this is pretty common knowledge. Fresh water is only 3%. Okay, and that's our problem. That's our challenge for actually generations to come is protecting our freshwater supplies because it's the least. I mean, we've got plenty of salt water. Getting fresh water out of salt water is a challenge and a very expensive process when you go trying to do that. It's been tried over and over. Okay, but now your freshwater, if you take a look at the freshwater and take a real look at it, 70% of the fresh water that's available on Earth, 70% of the 3% of the water is locked up in glaciers and ice. Okay, 29%, which is nearly 30%, is underground. And that's where we drill our wells and we drill down how many feet. And you live in some places like here, we're not so bad. People can get 30, 40, 50 feet down, you drill and you get water good. You go out west, like Colorado and Wyoming and Arizona, they're drilling hundreds of feet down in order to get good water. Okay, so that varies. And we'll talk about some groundwater stuff in the slides that'll be coming up. And then in rivers, lakes, streams, all the places we like to play, less than 1% of the fresh water on Earth is actually in them at any given time. Okay. So now here's your water cycle. This is very, very, very important concept to teach students. Okay, and I'll have a lab activity that I'll have on the course on D2L that you can put into your labs. That is a really good one to do with students, where you simply use a baggie and put water in it and hang it on a window at home and watch it for several days and actually get to see the water cycle in action. But you can see that on D2L, and it's good activity. Okay, in which you take and you draw this on the baggie, something like this. Okay, and you'll see that there. Okay, but here's a water cycle, and this is an essential thing to teach students, and we need to really have it being taught to students at the lowest level so as they understand more complex stuff as they get on up through school. But of course, water, you can look at a starting point at any point in any cycle, of course. If you have water in the oceans, and like we're saying, that's where 97% of water is. So you have evaporation the most by far from the ocean. Okay, going into the atmosphere, and then that's where we get all kinds of action to even, that's where you can draw this out to all, and that's where we talked weather last chapter, is that's where we get all the weather going on. And then we're going to get in some form of weather, precipitation, and get the rain brought back to the ground. And then that water is then going through a process on the ground, whether it's going to be in rivers and streams or ponds or lakes or percolating down through the soil to groundwater. And then, of course, we're pulling from those resources for our drinking water and all kinds of other uses that we use for water. Okay, so what I have, it's good to show this diagram, but what's most important is to get them to understand these terms. So I have these on the next few slides. First, you have evaporation. And it's pretty easy to get them to understand evaporation. Evaporation is where you go from a liquid to a gas. So you got water going, evaporating into the atmosphere to vapor. But some things we want to tie with it is 84% of the water in the atmosphere comes from the oceans of the world. And that's the reason the oceans of the world are the big drivers of how much rain that we get seasonally and annually. Okay, 84% of water evaporated into the atmosphere all the way around the earth comes from the oceans. Only 16% comes from land. Okay, and that's where, as it rains out across the land, then you don't get as much rain in certain places because of the way it rains out. And that's where you get your deserts and so forth. Okay, okay, precipitation. Okay, you want to get students to understand what all the forms of precipitation are: rain, hail, sleet, snow, etc. Okay, you can even talk about like hominy. There's something in between snow and hail is like a hominy. Okay, so first you'd want to teach that, the different forms, and then you can talk the fact that 77, this is everything, whether it's rain, snow, sleet, whatever, 77% falls directly in the oceans of the world, and only 23% falls on the land. And then a real interesting fact is only 7% of the water returns to the oceans that originally come from the oceans, because of the rest of the processes consuming that water or being held in lakes and streams. And then, of course, we use it, and we use it for industrial processes and all. And as that number goes down, we can have some real challenges in the world. And that's where we get water issues. Okay, evapotranspiration. This is probably the hardest one for anyone, not just kids, to understand. Evapotranspiration takes place in plants. Okay, and that's where plants naturally, with their roots, and somewhere along the way, you teach the students when growing some plants that you got to water them. Well, that water's been taken up through their roots. As that water moves up through the tree to the leaves, in the leaves you have stomata, and that water can leave the leaves. Okay, and that's where evaporation occurs into the atmosphere. So you call that process evapotranspiration. That way you're tying it to water that's moving through vegetation on Earth. And vegetation has a huge impact on the water cycle, because, and that's where it's always good to have a lot of vegetation around. And I mean, even in a home, having plants and so forth seems to help the air. And a lot of people know that. But anyway, that's evapotranspiration. Condensation. condensations where the water's been transported up into the atmosphere. But then in the right conditions, it condenses back to droplets, which can be as simple as clouds, still get held up there in the sky. But it can also be in a liquid form of droplets, like on your windshield or on a mirror or on a metal surface, where it's touching a colder surface and it goes back to the liquid form. Okay, so condensation just where you have a vapor that changes back to a liquid form. Okay, and you can see it in all kinds of places, and it can be, that's where if you do the one water cycle and bag activity that I'll have for you on D2L, then you can see that process. Okay, water cycle, this is still on the water cycle, and this is where we're talking where a lot of the water in the world is locked up in ice in some way, shape, or form. Now, a lot of people are on the glaciers and can get people to understand the glaciers hold a lot of it, but you have a lot of areas, like you go up to Alaska, or you can go to Mount Rainier in state of Washington, or up Glacier National Park, and even northern part of Colorado. There's mountains there that keep snow on the tops of them year round. Okay, in fact, the southernmost glacier in the continental United States is in Colorado. And if it's a glacier, then it keeps snowing it year round. Okay, but the big thing is these are holding water. Okay, froze up, and that greatly impacts the water cycle. And of course, with global warming and the talk on global warming, that's what they're worried about, and that they use also in the political push for legislation on global warming is they're watching what's going on with glaciers. But now it's not all just glaciers. You have permafrost. Like you go up Fairbanks, Alaska, and northern part of Canada, the extreme northern part of Canada, and like Greenland, you have permafrost. Okay, and that's where the ground stays frozen most of the year. And when it's frozen, it's freezing the water that's in it. Okay, and when some of the areas where it's warming up some and it's not staying frozen, it's really changing those environments, because now they're more like bogs than they are permafrost if they're not staying frozen all the time. Okay, but they're real wet. Okay, and like I said, mountaintop snow. And it's fun to go play in the mountaintop snow. Okay, I'm snowmobile and speed. I highly recommend both. Okay. And then, of course, you have to talk in the water cycle. These are greatly involved in the water cycle: rivers, streams, lakes, standing water on the road. I drove through some when I came here this morning. Okay, ponds, swamps, bogs, wetlands, and all these places become so important today because they're places we like to play. We kayak, we fish, we hunt, we boat, we just boat. And we go play with the alligators. I mean, they're important places, and it's important for us to take care of those places because we're highly reliant on that water. Okay, but it also, these places like reservoirs now have really kind of changed because we're also holding back water in those, not letting it get back to the ocean. So we control flooding in areas is the main reason the reservoirs come in. But reservoirs in areas like right around here, one of the closest, there's two I can think of: Mill Creek over in Clark County, Illinois, and then Raccoon Lake up east of Rockville. Those have tremendous economic impact on the area because of boating and fishing and all the money that's spent on all that stuff for people to play. Reservoirs are huge. The bigger the reservoirs are, the more impact they have too. I mean, they're highly recreational, lots of money. I mean, when you take a look at what some of the people spend on their boats and stuff, whether they're playing and got their, whether they're playing on the water, swimming and kneeboarding and all that stuff, or if they're fishing, either side spends a lot of money. It's not uncommon for people to have $50,000 boats and better. Okay, so they have real impact. Okay, but those reservoirs are part of the hydrologic cycle. And that's an important thing to teach kids, and to teach kids that those reservoirs were all made for a reason, which ended up being a good reason for us, recreational. But the main reason it was formed was so you don't get so much like Raccoon Lakes put in there, so you don't get so much flooding on down on the Wabash River. They can hold water back and control, release it, so you don't have as much flooding and stuff down in the Terre Haute area. Okay, Mill Creek was over in Clark County, which is really on a creek. But it helped some of those areas over there. And I talk to some of the farmers over there, they feel different, but, it's a relatively young one. It was, they get open in the early 1980s. But the whole purpose, even a lot of them out west, but now another different thing about reservoirs out west and down in Tennessee, you have a lot of hydroelectric dams on them. So not only did they make a reservoir, but they made a dam that they use to produce electricity. And you can talk that with students as well. Okay, but each one of these have a major impact on and are part of the hydrologic cycle. Like I said, the reservoirs are a huge part of it because we're holding that water back. And there's actually people, there's around areas, I know down in Sullivan, I think somebody in this class is from Sullivan. There's not Sullivan Lake, there's another lake out north of Sullivan. I've done some forestry work down there, and it's privately owned actually, but the government pays this family to keep that reservoir there to control flooding in that area. It's the Gettinger family that owns it for anyone down around that area. So I just call it the Gettinger Farm. Okay, so next, groundwater. Okay, an important part that students can't see, we can't see, is you got a whole lot of water underground. Or we hope there is, because that's where we pull most of our drinking water. Okay, of course, in some areas, the groundwater has been impacted by pollution and simply have dried up some. Okay, used it up. Okay, now around here, we're not too bad because we get plenty of rain. Okay, that essentially refills the aquifers. But the groundwater is underground where you get down to a layer, and it will vary how deep it is to where you're at. Okay, but it'll just be spaces in the rock where you'll have typically layers of gravel, and that's where the water comes up clean, is because it's in gravel and rock, not dirt. Okay, if you're pulling water out up here, it'd be dirty water. Okay, you're pulling it down here. That's the reason I had to put the well sleeves in all the way down to there, and you're pulling the water up clean, and it's kind of naturally filtered. But groundwater becomes groundwater by the fact that you get the rainwater and surface waters percolating down through. Okay, now there are areas that you have huge, essentially underground rivers that they'll call aquifers, which can be 40, 50 feet underground. And that's where a lot of your cities like to put their municipal water supplies, is where they got a very good water table under there. Okay, now the actual water table itself is the dividing line between where you have the good storage water down here, good clean water, and up here. And there will be, and the way you can find that, the best way to explain it is you start digging with a backhoe. And if you got a place, if you live in a place, and particularly some lowland areas, if you go to digging with a backhoe and you hit water, well, you hit the water table. Okay, and where it just you keep taking scoops out, or you dug down 3-4 foot with a shovel, and sorry, you're getting into a water table. Okay, and that water table doesn't stay the same all the time. Okay, but that's groundwater, and it's highly important because that's where we get most of our drinking water. Okay, now then, and this is going to be the last slide here. I think it's important in the teaching of Earth's waters that we show students what watersheds are. Okay, we do, and this isn't the last slide, there's one more after this. Watersheds, every river has a watershed. Okay, like we live here in the Terre Haute area, West Terre Haute area, in the Wabash River watershed. And the way I always like to explain it to students is, if I take and turn a hose on and just leave it on and leave it on and leave it on and leave it on, which it really wouldn't, because I don't have enough water ever coming from a hose, but if I could just leave it on and running, imagine where that water's gonna go. Okay, and you can usually get them talked to, well, if I did it right here at St. Mary Woods College, it would work its way to the nearest creek, which is Sugar Creek out here. Okay, and that would be in this area somewhere here. Okay, you can see the pointer on the slide. And then that Sugar Creek works its way to the Wabash River. Okay, but now if you go over in Terre Haute and you're on the east side of Terre Haute and you turn your hose on, it'll eventually run into probably Otter Creek. But Otter Creek will eventually go into the Wabash River. And then the Wabash River, and I think this is really important to try to talk through to your students, get them to understand if you hop in a boat and take off, if you go down the Wabash River, you're gonna hit the Ohio River. Once you hit the Ohio River, you're gonna hit here's the Ohio River. And you're gonna come down here and you're gonna hit the Mississippi, and then the Mississippi's gonna go into the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a good thing to talk with students, get them to understand what watershed they're in, where water would go, if they left water running, what stream would it go in? Get them to know where the local streams are. Okay, you can find, I didn't put one for Beagle County on here, but for each and every one of your counties, you can go to your NRCS website and you can find a map for your, where all the streams are around you. Okay, people should know. I mean, you're in a watershed. Okay, it's a conservation unit. Okay, here I think you ought to teach kids your major rivers. Okay, that are in Indiana. Okay, so of course around here our major one's the Wabash River. Okay, but over around Indianapolis, if you live around Indianapolis, you got the White River. But now the White River has two branches. It has this branch and then it has an East Fork. Okay, and then your Big Blue and Flat Rock rivers run into it. Okay, some people know them. If you're down south, you get the Patoka River here. Okay, up north, you got the Kankakee. If you're up up below the Hammond and Gary area, you have the Kankakee River and the St. Joseph's up there in Notre Dame country, South Bend. Okay, and then Illinois we have over here, which if you're over in Edgar County and those areas and drive west, you have the Imberall River and the Little Wabash River, which I've been around the Imberall River quite a bit. Okay, I believe this is Clear Creek rather than a river here. Okay, okay, and that pretty well wraps it up as far as what I think is the better things to teach. The only other thing I'd like to have you be done with students on working with waters is learn to test water and find out and realize there are some things in water that you can't see, but you can certainly test for. Okay, so that wraps this one up for this week. Have a good week.